Before we go deeper, notice what makes 7 money rules the wealthy follow that schools never teach so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. Most schools are built to train compliance, performance, and employability. That can help you earn, but earning is not the same as becoming wealthy. Wealth requires a different operating system. It requires understanding assets, cash flow, risk, time horizon, and ownership. If you never learn those principles, you can spend decades doing well on paper while falling short financially. That is why so many solid earners still feel financially exposed. Their life may look successful, but almost everything depends on continued labor. If the paycheck slows down, the whole system tightens immediately. Wealthy people think differently. They still care about income, but they care even more about what keeps working after the workday ends. The useful part of wealth building is that it rarely depends on brilliant inspiration. It depends on rules. Rules reduce emotional mistakes. Rules create repeatability. Rules protect you when you are tired, busy, optimistic, or scared. The wealthy are not always smarter in every area, but they are often more system-driven in the way they handle money. One reason these rules are ignored is that they do not feel dramatic enough. They sound almost boring, but boring is exactly why they work. Wealth is rarely built by constant novelty. It is built by correct allocation repeated for a long time. That is why these rules matter more than hacks, trends, and short bursts of motivation. Before we get into the 7 rules, here is the big structural difference. Average people often let spending expand first and then save what is left. Wealthy people tend to flip that order. They decide what the system needs first, then let lifestyle grow around what remains. That single reversal changes almost everything downstream. And the best part is that none of these rules require you to already be rich. They are not reserved for high net worth people. They are usable at smaller scales. In fact, the earlier you start living by them, the more powerful they become because time does more of the heavy lifting for you. That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. The later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. The first rule is simple. Fund the system before you fund the image. Wealthy people usually move money towards savings, investing, reserves, and owned assets before they start rewarding themselves with visible upgrades. The average person often does the opposite. They celebrate the raise first and build the system later, which is why later rarely arrives with enough force. This rule works because the first destination of money usually decides its long-term fate. If the money lands in lifestyle first, it disappears into maintenance. If it lands in assets first, it begins compounding before the rest of life gets a chance to consume it. The wealthy understand that sequence matters almost as much as amount. The second rule is that wealthy people aim to own things that can produce future money, not just things that display current money. Businesses, productive assets, index exposure, rental property, royalty streams, or ownership in systems that scale. They may still buy beautiful things, but they treat ownership as the engine and consumption as the byproduct. That distinction matters because most consumer spending is a one-way leak. It may improve comfort, and sometimes that is worth it, but it rarely improves the balance sheet. Wealthy people stay obsessed with the difference between buying something that costs money and buying something that can pay them back. That habit keeps their net worth moving in the right direction. Once you own productive assets, your thinking changes. You stop seeing money only as spending power. You start seeing it as a worker, a tool, a seed, something that can create future cash flow if placed correctly. That shift in identity is one of the most important psychological differences between earning money and building wealth. The average person tells themselves they will think about ownership later, once income is higher, once debt is lower, once life is calmer. Wealthy people usually start earlier, even if the first move is small, because they understand that ownership is not a reward for being rich. Ownership is one of the paths that makes wealth possible in the first place. Once the mechanism is visible, a lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. The third rule is about survival. Wealthy people protect the downside before they chase upside. That means reserves, liquidity, insurance, and not putting the whole system at risk for one exciting bet. They know compounding only works if you stay in the game. A good year means very little if one careless move can erase multiple years of disciplined progress. This does not mean wealthy people avoid risk. They usually take plenty of it, but they try to take asymmetric risk, where the upside is meaningful and the downside is contained. They do not confuse bravado with intelligence. They understand that a strong balance sheet gives you the right to take selected risks later, not random ones now. The fourth rule is one of the least glamorous and most powerful. When income rises, do not let fixed lifestyle costs rise at the same speed. Wealthy people often allow spending to increase, but more slowly than income. That gap becomes investable surplus. An investable surplus is what turns a successful year into a structurally stronger life. This matters because fixed costs are sticky. Once the house, car, subscriptions, school fees, staff, and maintenance costs move up, they become future obligations. The wealthy are often careful not because they hate comfort, but because they know that every new fixed cost quietly claims future freedom. Lower fixed costs keep optionality alive. The fifth rule is patience with structure. Wealthy people understand that time is not just a waiting room, it is part of the return. They choose assets, systems, and behaviors that become stronger the longer they are left alone. Most people interrupt compounding because they keep reaching for stimulation, timing, and visible proof too early. That is why the wealthy often look unimpressive in the middle years. They are not constantly resetting the system. They are not chasing a new identity every quarter. They are letting the machine run. It looks slow from the outside until one day the accumulated weight of discipline becomes obvious and very hard to replicate quickly. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests. It is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. The sixth rule is automation. Wealthy people do not rely on the perfect mood to do the right thing. They use recurring transfers, default allocations, standing investment rules, and structured review cycles. Systems matter because emotion changes faster than principles. Good systems keep moving when confidence drops or life gets busy. This is one of the most underrated advantages of rules. They remove negotiation. If every month requires a fresh debate about whether to save, invest, or spend, emotion will win more often than you think. The wealthy reduce that friction by deciding in advance what money does when it arrives. That is how discipline becomes sustainable instead of exhausting. The seventh rule is the deepest one. Wealthy people ultimately try to buy freedom, not just objects, not just status, but time, margin, resilience, and the power to make decisions without panic. That changes what they value. An asset that lowers dependence can be more meaningful than a purchase that only raises appearance. That is why rich people can look irrational to outsiders. They may delay certain upgrades even when they can afford them. But if the trade preserves optionality, it makes sense. Wealth is not valuable because it lets you impress people. Wealth is valuable because it lets you choose from strength and survive from strength when conditions change. If you step back, all 7 rules say the same thing in different language. Keep more than you consume. Put capital into productive places. Protect the downside. Let time compound. Reduce emotional interference. Buy freedom. That pattern is simple, but it is rare because it asks people to think structurally instead of socially. Schools often focus on inputs like effort, grades, and employability. Wealth building depends more on allocation, ownership, and compounding. That is why someone can be highly educated and still financially fragile. The wealthy are not exempt from mistakes, but they are often far more serious about where money goes after it is earned. Once the model gets cleaner, the behavior can get cleaner too. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. Start by auditing your current setup through the lens of these rules. What percentage of your income reaches assets before lifestyle? What are you actually owning? How exposed are you to one income source? How fast have fixed costs grown? Where is automation still missing? You do not need vague motivation. You need a clear diagnosis. Do not try to transform everything in one dramatic move. Pick one rule and install it properly. A transfer that happens automatically. A lifestyle ceiling for the next raise. A recurring investment schedule. A reserve target. Wealth grows when rules become defaults, not when they remain ideas that feel inspiring for 2 days. The next time income rises, treat it as a wealth event, not just a spending event. Decide in advance how much of that increase goes to assets, debt reduction, reserves, or long-term ownership. This is where people either widen their financial future or quietly trap themselves inside more maintenance. Start measuring your life with better questions. If your income paused, what would still keep paying you? How many months of margin do you really have? What assets are growing without your daily labor? Those numbers tell you far more about wealth than a headline salary ever will. The point of rules is not to make money feel rigid. It is to remove confusion. Confusion creates drift. Rules create direction. And once direction is clear, money starts behaving like a system, instead of a pile of random decisions stitched together by hope and habit. That is why the wealthy follow rules most people never learn. The rules are not secret because they are complex. They are hidden because they are quieter than the culture around them. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That is the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.